entering the market, relatively easy. Executing in this market, increasingly difficult. So if you think that you're going to enter this market and have these astronomical returns and earn your money back in a few years, take that reporting with a grain of salt. The reality is most properties in this market yield around the 8% mark. And that's sort of the EBIT mark, so that's before taxes. REID, we are essentially, Bali's only centralized independent database. There's been a few iterations or people trying to attempt how to collect data here, and it's very difficult. It's not by any means a simple process, but what we focus on is
Hello everyone, welcome to yet another Seven Stones YouTube podcast. Today we have a guest, Tom from REID, and the topic today will be a lot around statistics and data around the real estate market. And I guess for me, Tom, I've been here for a very long time, selling villas for the last 21 years. And that's always been the question mark, data. So maybe you can start with letting us know a little bit more about what is REID and what's your focus?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. It's really nice to be here. So REID, we are essentially, Bali's only centralized independent database. As you mentioned, it's there's been a few iterations or people trying to attempt how to collect data here, and it's very difficult. It's not by any means a simple process, but what we focus on is aggregating all of that fragmented data across Bali, across Indonesia, into one centralized database. We see the benefit of doing that is that it allows, different actors within the market to actually have a central source of knowledge, but also help kind of validate and verify this market. We started doing this about almost sort of three and a bit years ago now. Myself and my co-founder coming from a real estate background, we kind of knew what we were looking for. We knew how these systems operated in mature markets. And we thought that it was the right time to introduce something like this into Bali. We did take about 18 months to really actually validate the process of being able to, find the data, which if you look, it is out there. Normally in mature markets, you would go to government for a lot of your data. Unfortunately, as you're probably fully aware, Indonesia is not a very heavily regulated market when it comes to data or record keeping. So it is a matter of having to go and source that and find all of those fragmented sources. So you're looking at things like agents, developers, brokers, and trying to aggregate those, but also probably the more difficult part of that is standardizing the data, cleaning the data, verifying the data, and then obviously removing a lot of duplicates, old records, bad records, things like that. So over that initial period when we started, we kind of went through like, okay, can you do this? Where do you find it? Can you actually set up a system that, you can do it repeatedly? We did that, and then after kind of validating that database for about 18 months, building data partnerships so we can get direct sources, we then started to launch our market reports, which are free online. And then slowly we've introduced some additional services and products as, obviously the database grows. It grows on a daily basis. Every time there's a new property or a new land asset for sale or has transacted, we are sort of collecting that, adding that to the database. It's been a tricky task, but the longer you do it, the easier it gets. I think also as the data culture within Bali and Indonesia increases, it makes these systems and processes more valuable, but also B, a little bit easier to operate as well.
I guess the point that we've always discussed through the years is like you see what I would call sophisticated investors, family offices, or sometimes even investment funds And when you can't show them tangible, real data, they just cannot go through with the purchase. And I know there was a few real estate offices that used to have the graphs of land growth, but there was no real data. So I think what you guys are doing is going to help to push the market to a better level, I think. Not that we don't want what's going on in the market now, but I think we need that sort of next level of larger, more sophisticated investors to lift the whole business. I guess one of the questions on this, you obviously put together data then around, buying, selling real estate, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom sizes, lease, freehold, and so on. Mm-hmm. And one of the measurements or data that you use on this too is kind of related to tourism market. And in the sense that since COVID and the recovery was epic and really quick for Bali, maybe too quick in many ways. But what do you think drives that? Both domestic tourism, international tourism seem to continue to grow. So far, the stats for the first quarter this year, at least in the international market, has kept growing compared to last year. Some not that much growth maybe on the domestic market. That's probably related to the new government and some adjustments on their budgets and so on. But what do you think drives it? What is it that make Bali that attractive?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. As an Australian, Bali has always been, personally on my radar, I've always been aware of it because there is such a strong connection between, Indonesia and Australia being neighbours. But I do think, obviously, the rise of social media, that's had a huge influence on the growth of tourism within Indonesia, I think especially in the domestic market. Indonesians are some of the largest consumers of TikTok and Instagram products. But I think, when it boils down to it, the reason why Bali is such a desirable destination is because why people originally came here. You've been here for many, many years. There is this natural charm and appeal to this island, not only from like a kind of climate and landscape perspective, but I think also from a culture and from the sort of the people that you interact with here. And it is a very resilient market. And I think that is because it really is set up to cater to tourists. Even when you look at the property market, it is really set up to cater for tourists. It's not a metropolitan hub, it's not a transport hub, it's not a financial hub. So it doesn't have these kind of competing interests. It has a sole focus on tourism, offering, international level cuisine, activities, amenities. Some of the best hotels in the world are here. So, and I think also the diversity that it offers. You can go from really budget-friendly accommodation and tourist activities all the way to ultra luxury. So you have this huge spread that speaks to a lot of different audiences and also appeals to them, but also can be, you can kind of traverse that landscape as well. Maybe you can stay in a budget accommodation, but then go to a really nice restaurant or vice versa. So it does have broad appeal. And you're right, the bounce back post-COVID has been incredibly fast, and it's been incredibly resilient kind of tourist economy. But now I think we're seeing those numbers stabilize back to kind of pre-COVID sort of growth numbers, which were still very healthy.
I guess some of the aspects that we look at as part of that, and I'm not sure if you look at that, but also the residential aspect, as in residential tourism, and it's actually a thing. But what do you see on that side of things, like the residential or semi-residential people that stay here 6 months? Or
Yeah, there's definitely a big, I guess we would kind of classify it as kind of sea change tourism, where people come for prolonged periods of time off. I think on the back of COVID, that also became quite popular. People started to reframe the way they looked at their lives. Do I want to be working 9 to 5 just to go on a 4-week holiday, or do I maybe want to work remotely a little bit more often? I think companies are a lot more flexible with working arrangements now. So there definitely has been a spike or an increase in, I'm hesitant to say nomadic lifestyles, but more sort of half in, half off
Yeah.
sort of lifestyles. And we do see that a lot of buyers engaging in the market now are kind of looking at the purchase not purely either from a sort of holiday home or an investment point of view, but this really hybrid blended point of view where it's like, okay, I will utilize this, residential property for a few months of the year myself, and the rest of the time I can generate some income off it as well.
Like one of the markets we see, and you sort of touch on the remote workers and the digital nomads, whatever we want to call them, but I also see a lot of what we would call lifestyle change. So people are, like you said, tired. I don't want to be a 9 to 5. They may have inherited some assets or have some assets. They cash in and then they come here and kind of start all over. And I guess that has also triggered part of the increase that we've seen in the property market, in the sense that you sell a house or an apartment back in Sydney, you get a few $1 million, and you come here and you can build 3 or 4 or 5 and make a living out of it. Yeah,
that's one of the beauties of the the property market in Bali. Your median price point of 300,000 or just below 300,000 US dollars is incredibly competitive globally. So you're right. If you were to sell a property in Sydney where the median price is $1 million or above $1 million, very quickly you're like, okay, well, I could buy, maybe downsize in Sydney and then buy a second asset here in Bali and then live between the two. And one of them, the interesting thing when you look at the possibilities of buying property within Bali is that very few investments in real estate would you then go and actually enjoy yourself. If you buy an investment property, generally, you rent it out, you want to leave it, you just want it to generate income. I think the beauty of property within Bali is it can be an investment property, but you can then also get I hear a lot of people talk about lifestyle investment, ROI. So you kind of get this return, not just from a economic perspective, but from a lifestyle perspective. And you're like, wow, I'm generating some passive income, and it's also my sort of holiday for however long in a year.
Purchase average value, and this obviously goes over lease, freehold, HDB, and so on. And I remember not so distant past, we used to sell villas $1 million, $2 million, $3 million easily. That market seemed to have, I don't know, not disappeared maybe, but a lot less active, and it's ended up with this, I don't know what we call it, mass market, competitive market. Where do you see that sort of going? And
we actually recently did an in-depth sort of look at the luxury market for a client, and that market is actually still quite active. There are a lot of assets that sit above the $1 million mark. What I would say there is the transaction level is relatively low, and I would say it's probably not too dissimilar from what you've experienced previously. It's just more so now this market has A, exploded in size, but B, also the diversity has exploded. Previously, the Bali market was, 3-bedroom and above villa, a few hundred square meters sitting on 800 square meters of land. Big expansive property. That was the Bali market. There's been a heavy tilt towards smaller assets. Obviously that's driven by this idea of kind of short-term rentals. They appeal more to, or can be more competitive to a hotel. So you actually can kind of enter that market a little bit more. So the market is really diversified. So I wouldn't say that sector has disappeared. It's now just being kind of blown out of the water in terms of scale.
Drowns a bit, I guess, in the noise of the extension or the expansive market that we've seen on the other part.
I do think it's still about 15% of the market is above $1 million. So it's still a significant portion. But when you look at the rise of 1 and 2 bedrooms, apartments, it's a lot more competitive in terms of the diversity in the market.
I guess the next topic to look at, we talked a little bit about sort of tourism arrivals, market, where it is in terms of sizes and value. Next, I guess then is, what do you see as the sort of hot areas for now, but also maybe a little bit into the future? We talk about, Bukit, we talk about Canggu, Sese, Ubud. Where do you see it heading? Based on the data that you sit on.
Yeah, I think for us in the market, or people living in Bali and I guess active in the market, we probably will think of something like what we would classify as South Badung or the Bukit Peninsula, and say, oh yeah, that's been really active for the last couple of years, but it's only really now actually kind of emerging as a proper market where it has actual assets that are available and completed and are transacting. So that actually currently that is really the growth center of the Bali property market. Previously it was more North Badung, where it's your Canggu, Barawa, and that's still very healthy. That's still like the largest portion of the market. However, South Badung, driven by Uluwatu, Bingan, Balangang, this sort of edge of Bukit, has really started to become the leader in new supply and also in transaction volume. The interesting thing about South Badung, however, is that we just spoke about luxury properties and above the $1 million mark. That market is heavily skewed between 1 and 2 bedrooms. It's over 60%. Over 60% of that market is made up by that category of property, which is highly unusual in this market. Typically, you would see a bit more of a broad spectrum of asset types, but they are heavily concentrated in 1 and 2 bedrooms, heavily concentrated in off-plan projects. So a lot of, I guess, you could call it speculation, but a lot of new projects sort of offered there without necessarily being under construction. And also probably the largest growing sector in the market, a lot of apartments going up in South Badung as well. So when we talk about emerging, that's clearly like the growth center currently. And it's quite interesting also from a asset sort of perspective, it's that it's very clearly defined as small assets attracting younger, more sort of budget conscious buyers. If you look at sort of Central Badung, which is your Seminyak, sort of Kuta area, that's a little bit more homogenous. It's not necessarily defined by anything, but these emerging areas are starting to become more defined. So on the other edge of Badung, when we look at Mangwi, there you have Pereira and Chamagi, Sese. That's really defining itself as a bit more of a premium market. Their median price sits, about 350,000, so well above the market median. So it's actually defining itself on the upper end of the scale, again with a nice broad offering from 1 to sort of 5 bedrooms in asset types. That also seems to be a bit of an emerging area. And then next to that, obviously Nuanu is kind of one of the largest developments ongoing in Bali at the moment. And that's really defining the Nyani area. And that is really emerging as a kind of family orientated 3-bedroom and above sort of luxury market. Their median price is sitting closer to sort of the mid 400s. So we do see these kind of edges of Badung as kind of the growth centers, but also having a lot more, I guess, characterization of what they are as a market, as opposed to just, a bit of a homogenous market. In terms of future, we see a lot of interest and a lot of inquiries for land up on the sort of east coast. So everywhere from sort of Erasmus up to Ahmed. I think naturally the east coast has been a little bit maybe undervalued. Does have the sort of the beautiful white sands. It still has beautiful surf. So you're kind of getting, the benefits of Bukit, but without the crowds maybe. And it does have great access back into Gianyar, Ubud, the mountains. So it is very accessible as well. Obviously Bukit, the peninsula, you're kind of a bit isolated, kind of locked in there, trying to get out through Kuta. So we have had a lot of inquiries around that area.
A couple of weeks back, I think it was at the Speak Up Mondays, there was a session about the Bali perception towards real estate and what goes on. And one of the guys there, I think he works for one of the bigger villa management companies, and he had some data showing that these high-end villas, Q1 2025 dropped off compared to obviously 2024, but also year-on-year basic. with, I think he said 16%, but then he talked quite a bit about eco resorts, and some of these are high end, and he had a few examples of these being in Tabanan, being up in Munduk and these areas, and that was the opposite, that they actually see a higher occupancy and a higher rate than the sort of traditional villa that we talk about down here.
Yeah.
So I guess, I don't know if you have any thoughts on, is there an undersupply? Is that a market? Is that something that the market is sort of starting to look at, a bit more conscious, a bit more space maybe?
Yeah.
Nature?
Yeah, look, obviously, you know, going back to why is Bali popular, you know, I think one of the underlying aspects of that is the kind of access to nature, the beautiful landscape here. So I do think there's a very harmonious relationship between, you know, from a marketing and from a development perspective, between property and, you know, the environment. And so I think you can make a very harmonious offering. What I wouldn't necessarily say it's undervalued. I would say it's probably, the market at the moment is sort of settling into this rhythm after the last few years, sort of on the back of COVID, where we did see this really steep return to, you know, the numbers we saw pre-COVID. And what that created was a very active market where it was kind of like, as long as you have a property, you will generate income. And now what I think we're seeing is that so many new entrants have come into the market. There's been a whole increase of supply. This market is now going to become increasingly competitive. And we can already see that with, you know, over 2024, occupancy rates dropped about 5% relatively. But rental revenue increased 25% in total. So, you know, it's saying that the market is growing, but it's now just spread across a lot more assets. So I guess in response to this idea of ecotourism, or, you know, positioning your assets that way, I think it really comes down to more so when you're entering this market, of having a very clear definition of what you want to offer, who you want to offer it to, your price point, what your objectives are. And I do think carving out these niches such as ecotourism, you know, lifestyle tourism, the sort of sea change market is really important. You can't just enter markets and say, okay, build it and they will come. We've seen that fail.
Clear on concept, clear on branding.
Exactly. We've seen, you know, the idea of build it and they will come fail across the world. So you really need to know the market you're entering and who you're trying to attract to that. And I do think there is, you know, personally, I think ecotourism would be a great thing. I don't know, like, I would say it comes down to a personal preference. I would like to maybe see a bit more government regulation in that area to promote that, because I think Bali can have a very unique sort of approach. I did just see they have banned plastic water bottles below a certain size. I think more of that will help kind of carve out these niches and that positioning.
Maybe then combined with the sort of, not necessarily the allopathic health tourism, but the sort of what we would call functional, holistic health, you know, that can be combined with some of these aspects.
Exactly.
We talked about in the early part of this, back in the days when we saw these villas, it was kind of, you know, where the wind is blowing and very little tangible data. Now that is changing a lot, and there's a few other, you know, booking engines that also provide some of these, you know, rental and pricing data. But I guess like what would be your sort of message to an investor coming in, or someone considering investing into a villa or an apartment or whatever, in the sense that I guess you have two aspects of that market. One is someone who wants to be a developer. What would be the key factors and considerations they should take into the picture? And then you have the end investor or the buyer of a unit that looks at it, like we talked about a little bit, maybe from a lifestyle perspective, but obviously also wants to make some money out of it.
One of the beauties of this market, but also one of the real, I guess I would say, challenges of the market, is the barrier to entry is very low. So if you are coming in on the developer side or the builder side, you will face nowhere near the sort of regulations you would face in a Western market. Now, that is good in the perspective that allows a lot more innovation and a lot more entrepreneurship. That's great. However, it also does allow, a lot of people to enter the market who necessarily haven't executed these sorts of things before. Building a property, I've worked in... Lack
of knowledge and expertise, I guess, yeah.
Exactly. I've worked in real estate and development for over 15 years, and it's never easy. You can conceptualize it all you want. It ain't going to work like that. You're going to run into roadblocks, you're going to run into challenges, you're going to go over budget, all of these things. So, entering the market, relatively easy. Executing in this market, increasingly difficult. So I think the first thing is really, you don't know what you don't know. So you really need to sound out good advice. You really want to understand the market that you're entering and what are the trends, and also be very clear on your objectives when you're coming in to this market. Basically, if you think you're going to come in and sell very easily in this market, that's not going to happen. The market clears at about 30% over a 12-month period. So that means 3 in every 10 villas is selling. So if you think you're going to come in and very quickly just turn over assets, maybe you might, if you're very good or you're very successful or you have a very unique product. However, if we look at the statistical averages, that's not what's happening here. There's a lot of reasons for that. So I think the first thing is, being fully aware of the market that you're entering. The second thing is really carving out what you were providing from that development perspective. If you want to build 1 and 2 bedrooms, why? Where's the best location for them? Who are you targeting? What do you offer that competes against the increasingly large supply of 1 and 2 bedrooms? Or on the opposite end, if you're doing a luxury, property, again, what's the best location? Why? Does the actual asset and land value equal the type of value that you're positioning your property at as well? So I think those fundamentals are really important. And then I think from the buyer perspective, or people looking to come in from an investment perspective, or even a lifestyle perspective, is that, again, understanding this market, there are very solid fundamentals. It is a tourist-driven economy, and the tourist market is incredibly active and incredibly robust here. So you have very strong fundamentals. However, if you think that you're going to enter this market and have these astronomical returns and earn your money back in a few years, take that reporting with a grain of salt. The reality is most properties in this market yield around the 8% mark. And that's sort of the EBIT mark. So that's before taxes. So that is still incredibly healthy on a global scale. But you've got to take that in consideration, that it also is more than likely going to be a leasehold property, which fundamentally is a depreciating asset. So you've got to balance that up and also understand, what that means in real terms. And then, but as I said, economically it's still quite good and healthy and very steady, but you do also get this lifestyle benefit to it as well. So there is more than just the investment perspective. So I think, obviously sounding out great advice is fantastic. Increasingly, I hope that our data is getting into the market. If not, obviously you can visit our website and find free market reports. But I do think having that context will help you either A, find your opportunity, or B, avoid your risk.
I think one topic that we talk a lot about internally with us and also with clients is what you touched about, the ROI, and what, like in Australia or where I'm from, Norway, these promises, you just can't do it.
No.
You'd be in trouble with all kinds of watchdogs and institutions that would hammer you. How do you see that? Like, is that something you talk about with your data too, the real ROIs and the real data, so people can actually say, this is what I'm going to get? I've seen, I think, fantastic figures, 42%, 25%, And when you start looking at the financials, the rates and all of this, it quickly fades away to 6 to 12. I think is sort of and 8 maybe an average. Yeah.
We talk about it naturally because there is just so much noise about it in the market. I think the one interesting thing to me, where I'm from and the areas, the countries that I've worked in across the world, ROI is when you're selling an asset, it's never advertised with the asset.
Yeah.
You never say, here's a property for sale and here's the potential yield. It's kind of, here's a property, and then it's the individual's, because it is a projection, it's the individual's responsibility to work out, do I think I can get a good yield on this or not? Yeah. So I always find that quite interesting, where here you have, the property and the ROI right next to it. It's kind of like, that is,
I think
morally there might be some issues there.
Yeah, and we had some educational exercises that we used to work with and still do, but media sites that are focused towards the Australian market, and we would push in listings. And it was specific, like even saying prime location, you can't say that because it's a promise that it's subjective, right?
Yes.
And the same on ROIs, that we just had to take all of that out, and the agents here couldn't understand that.
Yeah. So it is a unique aspect of this market, and understandably, again, it is a tourist-driven economy, so more than likely, it's a very small percentage of the market who actually are buying to live full time. So there is a natural correlation, which is understandable. The way that we approach it, so we will, at REID, we actually do property valuations, either from the sale or from the buy side. And the way that we approach it is that our valuation is based off a cost analysis, a comparable analysis, and a sales analysis. And we'll kind of blend those three methodologies. That will provide the fair market value. And then we provide an average 10-year yield analysis on the back of it. So what that allows us to do is go, okay, well, we know what the fair market value is based on either what this development is actually putting in and how much it's, spending on its finishes and land and fittings and all of these things, and also what is transacting in the market, and provides a fair assessment of that. And then based on what that fair assessed value is, would it actually yield well or underperform relative to the market? And that way then you can kind of make the decision. If you do that in reverse, where you go, well, okay, if I rent it at a certain level, at a certain occupancy, and I can return this much or net this much in a year, therefore my price should be X. That's just a very risky model, because you're basing that on a projection in a market that, as I already mentioned, is increasingly competitive. And, a lot of those figures are cherry picked from the top sort of 10% performing properties. There's over 45,000 rental villas alone in this market, not to mention the hotel market. And even if we look at the hotel market, their occupancy sort of hovers around 60%. So if we think for some reason villas are massively outperforming that, which they're not, because their occupancy hovers in the mid-50s, there's just a lot of, I guess, misleading figures out there. Those numbers, the 60 and sort of mid-50% occupancy, it doesn't mean that it's a underperforming market. It actually means that it's quite steady market. And you want to look at a broader aspect, rather than, okay, well, I'm going to benchmark myself against these 5 properties, for example, or something, because there's so many variables. What's your management style? The algorithm on these booking sites, how you sort of land at the top or how you perform. Reviews on these sites, one bad review could kind of ruin your reputation. So there's so many variables in that. You really want to, I guess maybe the idea would be under promise and over deliver. But it is easy to kind of get caught up in all of the big numbers here.
So I guess with that's a tremendously valuable tool, I guess, for the whole range of someone considering coming in, developing villas. They can get real data out of REID. An agent that will get that question from investors, and rather than relying on, the promises that we know most often is over-promising, down to actually a buyer that can come and say, maybe with the reports that you do, but also if they want some more insights into a specific area, they can come to you and get more real data that then can help them to make the right decision.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, as I said, we provide free reports, but we also do paid services. I think one of the big things, especially when we work with a lot of agents and developers, our role in the market is an independent sort of source of knowledge. I think one of the biggest challenges for a lot of agents and developers here is educating and informing their clients when they come in. Again, either on the buy or sale side, trying to kind of educate them around what the price should be or what is achievable or, what's a good purchase price, and justifying those numbers. When you're dealing with, say, a limited data set or a small portfolio of properties, it's hard to kind of have a macro perspective. Yeah. And that's what we can provide. And also, I guess, take a bit of that responsibility to where an agent or a developer can be like, look, you don't have to trust me. Here's this independent source. Yeah. All they do is data. They're not, we don't sell, we don't buy, we don't develop or anything like that. That way, we have this role of just providing information, and then conversations and strategies can be built on top of that.
Yeah, I guess we touched on quite a few topics. I guess the last one that we talk a lot about at Seven Stones, and that's the regulation process. Build permits, all through the PPG, SLF, zoning, different types of operational permits and so on.
Yeah.
What do you see and what do you think is a good advice to people in that space when they are considering developing to when they are considering buying?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, the first thing would be really seeking out the right advice. I think someone like yourself and Seven Stones, having operated in this market for so long and having quite good relationships with the various sort of governing bodies, you can provide the information where it's not just, oh yeah, we can get that done, or, someone can look after that, which you'll find a lot of in this market. It is actually understanding that, even though it's not as heavily regulated as Western markets, there are some very clear guidelines about how to operate within this market. You have the zoning guidelines and what should be built where. Like, that's very clear from the government. The regulations around when you are building, what should be included, setbacks, heights, roof typologies, all of these things, they're very clear.
Yeah.
The enforcement of them, however, has been
lacking
is a nice way of putting it for many years. So, being aware of those is important. And, regulation, it really does not stifle the opportunity here, because again, it's not that restrictive. It is just a helpful guideline. And I think increasingly the government, as I'm sure you're seeing as well, the government are paying more attention to this, because there is this balance that could jeopardize this market if, unregulated construction continues, then it may ruin what is so attractive about Bali. Some people might say it's already happened. I would say we're probably not even really close to that yet. I think there is, this market is still relatively untapped. So, be aware, but I think also, and this is hard to, I guess, quantify, but in a way, be respectful. I think a lot of foreigners who come into this market, they wouldn't necessarily be able to get away with or do the types of things that happen within Bali. And I think at the end of the day, my company, we're a foreign-owned company. We need to be respectful of the laws and regulations.
Self-regulated is kind of what you're saying.
Exactly. Just because you can or you might be able to get away with it, it doesn't mean you should. And it probably means that in the long run, you're running a lot riskier game than if you just abide by the relatively simple regulations that exist. That again, getting the correct licensing is not an expensive process. Getting your SLF and PPG is not an expensive, relatively process. Yes, it may be arduous and it may take some time, but that's okay as long as you're abiding by it. In the long run, it will actually work out well for you. again, given the increasing kind of discussion and scrutiny on it, I do think that more and more so you'll be running the risk if you turn a blind eye to it. And that's not just from the construction side. That includes business registration, taxation, staffing, all of these things. There are many different areas where you could skirt regulation, but I think that's getting...
I agree, and I think, like you talked about, and we see too, that regulations are actually there. They're quite sophisticated and developed, and I think it lacks a bit of political will, probably. Maybe also a political understanding that if you don't do this, it will go over the top and we'll have issues. And with a proper enforcement, I think we'll see a better market in the sense that more, again, sophisticated investors and people that think long term will come to the island.
And I think something that gives me confidence in that area is that yes, there has been a large influx of, let's say, boutique developers and more individual developers into this market. And that's been great to sort of drive publicity and drive diversification and all of these things. But what what we see and what we would lean on is that the increase of mature developers coming into the market. So, down in Sessa, you've got Anantara, which, yes, maybe not everyone is completely happy with that, but it also does signify large amounts of capital coming into this market, sophisticated developers coming into this market. So when those type of companies and operators enter this market, that does signal that, there is room to grow still, and there is safety in those regulations and sort of guidelines that are meant to be abided by. If it was just kind of this Wild West and, a free-for-all and there wasn't much certainty from, I guess, the governance side, then I think we would probably not see the interest that you get from a lot of the large developers entering the market, the hotel chains, even the big developers who have been in Bali for a long time, the sort of Miras, Temoras, Oxos of the world. You can see that they are developing and delivering ever sophisticated products. So, that does say that there is a maturity and development happening here. It does just take time. Real estate is a slow-moving market. It's not a day-to-day market. It's a quarter-on-quarter, year-on-year market.
People that want to educate themselves about property, hospitality, investment opportunities in Bali, what's your sort of top advice in terms of where should they start? What sources is it out there? You guys are there. Maybe there's others. What do you think?
Well, obviously the first port of call should be REID. Our website, realestatebali. You can find free market reports as well as paid market reports for specific locations. What that will provide you is just a good contextual basis. Obviously, if you want to go deeper or, you have more specific kind of questions, we can help with that. But I think really at the end of the day, we're not gatekeepers of information. We actually help try and distribute it throughout the market. So we would really recommend that, you do find someone that you can really trust and has a solid track record within the market when it comes to advisory, be that from like a real estate agent perspective or, a company establishment perspective or anything like that. It is important to, work with people who have been in this market and have done it not just maybe for the last couple of years, but probably for a long period of time because, Bali it's an ever-changing market and there is a lot of nuance to it. It's, as I sort of mentioned earlier, the barrier to entry to start a company is not necessarily that difficult. So you might find a lot of advisory companies, but, I think you really want to do your research around who to work with there. Again, I really do think it comes down to your end goals around what you want to achieve coming in to Bali.
Yeah.
You know, what we see a lot of is, you know, there's over 6 million foreign tourists who come here every year, sometimes for the first time, most often for the first time. And they arrive and they're like, wow, this is amazing, this is beautiful. And very quickly they discover, I can buy something here. And then very quickly they discover it's how cheap. And so they go on this sort of journey of like, oh wow, it's very captivating. And you're in holiday mode. And you know, you're probably sitting by a pool, having a couple of drinks, and it all seems too good to be true. And then you start to get into the nitty gritty of it, and you're like, oh, I've got to do this. Oh, I need to set up this company. Oh, I need to fill out this paperwork. And it kind of can lose its romance very quickly. So I think, you know, that initial allure is the reason why a lot of people do want to find property here or build property here. And I think remembering that is important. You know, it's not a super sophisticated system where everything is an easy online form and, you know, you can complete it in a couple of days. So remembering why you want to do something, knowing what your objective is, whether it's a lifestyle change, whether it's an investment opportunity, but then at the end of the day, still, you know, understanding that it will still come with all of the, you know, all of those crossing the T's and dotting the I's that is required. Because at the end of the day, especially within property, you're not making a small financial decision. You're making quite a large financial decision. And if you wouldn't make that large financial decision in your home location, or, you know, as a developer, if you wouldn't make that by yourself without having the right partners and the right information, then, you know, we really shouldn't expect buyers to be doing that here as well. So I think it is important to, you know, to ask those questions. And there are so many good advisors. There's advisors who can help you relocate. There's advisors who can help you on the taxation and the legal side. There are advisors who can help you on the brokerage, even kind of buyers agents who can find properties for you. I know you offer a lot of these services at Seven Stone, so it really is, you know, finding that that good partner or partners and having that data and that information to give you the foundation to build upon. And then I would also say the last thing is have a healthy dose of skepticism. Challenge what you hear, ask the right questions. When you boil down to it, you'll still get really strong fundamentals. But, you know, if you see a number and it looks remarkable, maybe ask a few questions and really dive into what, you know, what's behind that number. And, you know, especially when it comes to management fees and operating fees and things like this. So, do your research. Find good partners, ask the right questions, and go into it with the same enthusiasm of how you discovered the idea, but with, you know, the patience and the understanding that it will take, you know, a bit of time to get it right as well.
Thank you, Tom. I think that was tremendously educational for a large part of our clients, market in general, developers, buyers, even people coming in, like you said, first-time buyers. If you like this, obviously click on the YouTube and like us. And if you have any comments or questions, you're more than welcome to comment on the video and reach out to us through our different channels, whether that is social media, webpage, WhatsApp, and you're more than welcome to also reach out to REID and Tom for data. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.